Hi everyone. Today we will talk about the fragmented liquidity. How is it important to the market? And I have a question about what do you think? There are multiple projects that are trying to address liquidity fragmentation in this space. Do you believe there will be only one project succeed, or there will be multiple models that are operating independently?
I would like to start then. Hi everyone, Sergej here from 1inch, co-founder. So I think that we will have other projects who build similar things or comes with innovations, and it's good for the user. I wish to have more projects actually to onboard people. So we have, for example, Uniswap, ZeroX, Matcha operating in US. We are not operating in US at all. So you know why. So and it's good. They onboard new people. They educate new people. And one day, as soon as clarity is there in terms of regulation, maybe we can all play together in the same field. Yeah, competition is good for the user. So what I think.
Yeah, I guess I will take sort of the opposite approach. Obviously at LayerZero, we're on the base layer of how sort of any arbitrary state data moves across different networks. But I think, on that level, in terms of unifying liquidity, there can be many applications that build on top of them, including intents and whatnot. So in terms of like the very, very base layer, I think it'll be sort of like one or two players that sort of take the rest of the market. And then on top of that, on like the consumer application layer, in terms of like bridging and other unique experiences, I think there will obviously be many more applications built on top.
Hey guys, so from a DWF and OpenEden perspective, I think unified liquidity is obviously one of the bigger questions. It's really a bigger question that we try to solve. In real estate today, for example, in Dubai, if you buy a real estate property, it's not fungible with a property in Singapore, but imagine putting real world assets on chain on the ERC20, you unify liquidity, right? You are able to bring that liquidity into from different segments of the market into a particular standard on the blockchain, and I think that's effectively one of the biggest use case, and that's a 10x user experience. So imagine buying a real world asset protocol. Without the trouble of going through the legal and your documentation. It's very painful buying properties, as you may be aware, and doing everything on chain that will resolve the liquidity because you have more transparency. Like imagine buying a fishing farm in Vietnam. Like what's the secondary liquidity? What's the buyers or sellers volume over the last 2-3 years? It's almost impossible, and you don't even know the provenance of the data. But imagine putting everything on the blockchain. You can see this hacker, this per square foot of fishing farm that's been sold in the last 2 years, and that brings provenance, that brings authenticity to liquidity. And liquidity is a function of both demand and supply. And I think even though blockchain do serve the purposes of unified liquidity, obviously with 1inch aggregator with LayerZero or OFT, we are still in a very nascent state of unified liquidity. We have to wait for the development of infrastructure as they get more robust. But my view is that we are building a path towards unified liquidity, whether it's real world assets, whether it's crypto assets, whether it's meme coins, that there is that unified liquidity concept that we're all trying to solve in a different way, in a different stack of the infrastructure today.
I think from the perspective of whether we have one winner, many winners, we could really look at a lot of older industries. If you look at traditional markets or .com, all these different things, you often see a few large players that really integrate the whole stack once an industry starts to mature. Usually, as we say, these nascent developments that we see in our industry, you have a lot of scrappy, smaller, single source, single action things. It's just swapping or just bridging. But I think over time, we're going to see a lot more like unified stacks where it makes a lot of sense. If you're a Microsoft or something, you're not just distributing an operating system. You also have your own bespoke applications. You have calculator applications. You have Microsoft Office. You have all these different kind of aggregated offerings that you have. When you look at the moat of a lot of more established companies, it's the distribution rails. You know, when you're a company that has 80% of liquidity, 80% of volume, everyone's going to go there. The conventional wisdom from like a traditional finance background like mine is liquidity begets liquidity, right? So once you see an incumbent party really attract a lot of that liquidity, and then they start to become Lindy, if you will, which is a term that people use a lot in our industry, that becomes really hard to shake, right? You could get better execution. They could take risk transfer becomes a lot smaller of a traded risk if you're looking at something like cross-chain bridging, for example. So yeah, I think you're going to see a few large incumbent players that are really sticky, whether that be bridging, whether that be off-chain solvers for swapping, whether that be market making, like any of these different solutions, it becomes a lot easier to continue to grow and integrate more and more things into the stack.
So overall, I would like to add at the end, DeFi is and Web3 is about composability, and it's good to have a lot of projects where you can plug and use the liquidity or services to build another product on top of it.
But what technological innovations should divide the market between the project and how they shape the audience for each? What do you think about it?
I think that we're talking about like composability, right? Like having these kind of isolated actions that can really easily be folded into the things people want to do in crypto, right? That could be borrowing, lending against assets. That could be moving from one chain to another to speculate on meme coins, like we see on the screen here. That could be like some yield opportunity. Maybe you're in a country that doesn't have access to a lot of like more mature credit markets, stuff like that. So I think as we see a lot of these products being built, the ones that tend to win are the ones that are interoperable with a lot of the incumbent solutions. It just becomes a lot easier to work with a partner instead of trying to build. We're not going to build our own DEX aggregator solution. It's better to work with someone that's already put in that time, the effort, the R&D, the development and such, and build something bigger together.
From my side, I would like to add, I think we will have user-centric products and infrastructure products. Sometimes it happens that infrastructure, like user-centric products, became infrastructure product as soon as someone released new innovation and introduced a new approach and better user experience. But there's always a way to somehow collaborate and work together. So we have seen this multiple times. And for example, CalSwap is using API from 1inch, API from 0x, from Paraswap, and some other aggregators. And the user get the best result at the end.
Yeah, I think in terms of unifying liquidity and any new innovations, right, I think we have to be pretty careful on how that's done and extrapolate it in the long term, right? I think if we take a look back on DeFi and like the core principles that matter to us, like we ultimately care about like self-sovereignty, self-custody, being permissionless, decentralized, right? And I think a lot of the new infra being built, whether that's like on asset transfers or even some portions of like intents, and other unifying sort of like protocols sort of take a shortcut on a lot of those principles that matter. And if we want to build a consumer experience that really is going to scale to millions of people, and to the rest of the broader audience, we should build that on these principles that matter. And I think we're sort of taking a step back in sort of like the DeFi realm of like why that matters to us. And so, like I encourage all these builders, right? Like really care about these principles when you're building out, because that's why we're building in DeFi, right? If we're trying to build a consumer experience and a unified liquidity layer, but we're cutting edges and we're, cutting corners around that, then we're not really advancing the space, right? We're sort of just building Web 2.5, but like there's a reason why we're building in crypto, right? We're building on the blockchain to take advantage of those unique features. And so, I think in terms of really cool innovations, I think there's a lot on the infra side and a lot on the consumer side. But, we're sort of sacrificing some of those principles there.
You ever think about, I think about both the partners that we work with, right? Like the B2B side, but also like the B2C side. A lot of consumers don't necessarily know a ton about the benefits of decentralization, self-sovereignty, all these things you just talked about. And a lot of times they want to see the most efficient, they want the cheapest swap, the easiest bridge, the quickest, movement of your stable coins, whatever you're moving around. And, how do you kind of think about pushing back on that, I guess? Because like from my perspective, we're here really, obviously we want to build cool things that we're proud of and, that are kind of in the crypto ethos. But at the same time, we got to build things that consumers actually want to use, right? So it's like if you're, hypothetically this decentralized application that, is maybe a little slow or less scalable or whatever, that a centralized solution, how do you get the consumer to, go with your solution versus that, quicker, faster, cheaper, right? Because these things aren't, perpetual motion machines, right? You can't obviously have decentralization, interoperability, and all these things and optimize for everything else at the same time.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think, there's a fine line to kind of tread there, especially as a developer and a builder. But I think ultimately what matters most is having a permissionless environment where you can sort of choose how you want to build that out, right? I think a lot of the times, in crypto, you want to sacrifice, being decentralized for the sake of speed or costs. And I think, ultimately for the end consumer, that might be a positive thing. But for the developer, and if you're building 5-10 years out, you're not building censorship-resistant rails at that point, right? If you're very centralized, at any moment, any entity can shut you down. And just like that, you don't really have a protocol, you have a service at that point, right? So I think the core principles matter a lot, but protocols that build on those also offer permissionless rails. For example, at LayerZero, you can choose how slow or how fast you want cross-chain transfers to be based on finality and how many confirmations you want to require. And again, that's a decision that you can make as an end developer, right? We don't want to force anyone to make those opinionated decisions. We don't want to make that on their behalf. But I think having those rails is super important versus just having like one static set that you kind of just push onto these developers.
2 points to add. I think number one is, for DeFi, I think DeFi means a lot differently from one to another. To Sergej, DeFi is, aggregated. To Matt, DeFi is, cross-chain, bridging. The bigger question and deeper question that I appeal everyone to address is, what are we solving real-world problems, with DeFi? What we exactly trying to solve? I mean, DeFi is cool. We use solvers, we use intent. There's a lot of this debate around, complicated things that I may not necessarily understand. I don't think I understand most of the technical stuff. But I think what we're trying to solve at the heart of everything, it's accessibility, permissionless, quick, seamless, transparent. And that's the core tenets of blockchain. And I think applying those principles, we are able to serve customers with user-centric products, and that should drive innovation from the product standpoint, because it's users, and then based on users, you have the feedback loop of problems, and then you use the problems and you innovate, and that's how you solve real problems. Web 2 world, we're not solving 1% of the like crypto is 1% maybe. We're not really solving...
Maybe less.
Or maybe less, yeah. We try to solve 99% of the world problems, right? And I think truly, the bigger problem is, how do you solve the Web 2 problems? How do you get people in Africa access to stablecoin? How do you get them better access to a better wallet experience, getting them a savings account, non-custodial, on-chain? That's what we're trying to solve. The second thing is, with real-world assets in particular, it's not really about the innovation per se. It's also about the regulatory understanding, right? For example, in my space, you need potentially a license to hold the securities. And how do you distribute? In different jurisdictions, you have different distribution regimes. So in RWA space, it's slightly different when it comes to go-to-market and distribution. It hinges on the regulatory environment, the space you're in, and what you're distributing. So that's really those 2 points that I want to just stress.
I would like to add, so I solve my own problems normally when I build Web3 applications, because I have always pains with bridges or something, then we build just product for ourselves and it looks like other people like it.
If you take a look from the user side, like from user experience, what do you think? How important to unify liquidity can simplify users' experience? abstract away from all the complexities?
I could speak on that a bit. I think from my perspective, the way crypto really wins is when people don't even know they're using crypto. I think that's like conventional wisdom at this point. But what that really means is I think about the internet, right? Like when the internet was first created and, obviously it was this kind of like very expensive, to kind of even have as a hobby. And then, it became more and more in the public consciousness. You had families getting a, home computer and such. Nowadays, like, everyone has access to the internet, right? Like, everyone has a computer in their pocket that is a phone, right? And it has immediate access to the internet. But when you first started using the internet, you had to access it through, like, root access, right? You were actually directly connecting to the internet and interfacing with it. Now you just get a $50, monthly subscription with, like, Fios with Verizon or something, and you're good to go. Right, so that's kind of how I think about crypto, right? Like no one's gonna know whether they're on Base or they're on Monad or Ethereum or Barachain or any of these chains. All they care about is like, I have $200 that I want to invest in this thing. Go do it, right? So it's really about completely abstracting away that experience. They don't need to know like about gas fees. They don't need to know about like self-custodying wallets, of course, unless they want to, right? Like I do agree with Matt about giving people the choice for these things, but I think the conventional person really does not give like any thought about this stuff, and it's just kind of an annoyance. So if we talk about right now, the numbers I heard recently is there's around 350,000 daily active users on Ethereum. If you look at something like Facebook or something where you've literally billions of users accessing these things, we're like absolutely nowhere close to mass adoption. And I think really the main thing that's going to drive that is when we're actually like creating products where you're like, I want to get yield and I deposit into this thing and now I have access to all this liquidity.
Yes, I fully agree. So users should not think about how, they just want something, right? They want results. And this is kind of a way of also building new applications. So like we see more intent-based protocols who just take care that the users only think about what they want actually to achieve with this interacting with the intent-based protocol, and how it should be implemented is another story of other people who are super professionalized to do that. For example, professional traders, market makers take care how to exchange one asset from one chain to another chain. The user just need to wait maybe 2 minutes. This is a great experience, and for sure users should not think about what network it is. Yeah, so do I need now another wallet to use this network? They should not care about that. There are also some nice projects, like for example in Phoenix from Synthetics founders. Really one of the also kind of next generation applications. You just can just log in with your Touch ID on your Mac, and then you have social recovery, and you can just easily use the DeFi products in one-stop shop access.
Yeah, I think, these are super interesting, questions and thoughts. And, I actually have no idea what the next 5-10 years looks like. It's hard to predict. It's hard to predict what's going to happen 6 months from now in DeFi, yet alone 3 months out. But I think in terms of all these really awesome, abstracted experiences, I totally agree, right? If you actually ask like the average DeFi user, like, have you used LayerZero? Like, they probably have no idea. We're not a front-facing protocol. We're in the background. If you've ever used like EtherFi, Pendle, Swell, any of these protocols, or bridged, any money across any chains, 80% of the times it's going to be through LayerZero. You just don't know about it, right? And so I think in order to kind of keep building in that future, like we're focused on sort of building those primitives, with the core ethos of DeFi and building with permissionless immutable structures. But again, I think on the consumer side, you can take those rails and build on top of them, which, we're seeing a ton of applications building out, which is really awesome. Again, we build for the future in terms of like future-proofing the architecture. So we allow permissionless structures. We allow, decentralized and censorship, resistant rails to build on. But again, we don't want to control like how builders build that. And so, hopefully, we'll keep delivering and building in the future, but the consumer applications and the end users using them won't actually know they're using LayerZero in the background.
My take is obviously a biased one, and I'm going to say that the whole crypto universe is actually a test net for the real assets, like real estate, securities, bonds. Like fixed income as an asset class itself is $27 trillion. That's way, way, way bigger than the crypto market cap today. My point is that this, what we're doing today, it's experiment for something bigger. You know, the bridges, the aggregators, we are building that for real world asset to be traded on eventually. My take is, meme coins, it's tokenized culture. That's a real world application of real world assets or real world culture tokenizing in a format. Obviously, 90% of meme coins are not investable, obviously, but point here is that, I actually think that the real value is unlocking 99% of assets in the world that are going to be traded on DeFi infrastructure. That's where I look at DeFi as a very optimistic individual, whether I'm an investor, builder, or a sideline investor. I tend to take a 10-year view that we will be using the DeFi infrastructure to trade NASDAQ stocks like Tesla. Like, why do I have to wait 9:30 p.m. every day just because I'm in Singapore to buy Tesla stock? Why can't I do that 24/7? Why can't I do it over the weekend? Like, there's some basic fundamental arcane TradFi architecture that is so obvious that it's meant to be disrupted. It will be disrupted. It's not a question of if, it's when. And if you think about it, the thing that we're building today, we're the early visionaries. We are here early together. We see this as early pioneers of what we think generations to come, our children, your grandchildren, we're trading on DeFi infrastructure. I'm actually confident Uniswap will soon be allowing Tesla stocks in the next 5 years. That's the sort of future I see in DeFi. And that's why I'm sometimes a dreamer. I'm not a good investor. I dream a lot.
I'm pretty sure it will happen. It's on my side also. I have always terrible experience when I trade stocks. Yeah, so you need to wait. And like in Germany, for example, like there's also arbitrage time. So and you actually, if you are too early, you get worse rate, and a little bit after it's already a normal rate, like in US, and then you get arbitrage and you lose actually on your trade. And I'm pretty sure we will have stock on chain trading. Yeah, I'm sure.
What do you think is really important for the industry to build the next for unified liquidity, and what is the main blockers?
I think there are no blockers right now. So the next big thing is atomic cross-chain swaps built by 1inch right now as a first pioneer. I don't know why no one came to the solution to build just atomic swaps. What works just works and simple. We will see how the other people will move this direction. So we publish white papers. You can read about Fusion Plus. Yeah, from our point of view, we are far enough to offer really great user experience already with the technology what we have.
I think a lot about the next step being around integration or I guess integrated DeFi, where, right now I think the experience for messing around with like DeFi or crypto more broadly, not only do you have like fragmented liquidity, but you also have fragmentation of experience, right? Like if you need to swap a token, you need to go to a DEX, right? If you want to say borrow against an asset, you need to deposit that asset in some money market, and then, now you can do that, but that's a separate website. If you go and you want to bridge to a chain, you need to go to some bridging platform, that is either for isolated for that asset or broad, like, called blue chip assets. And that goes for everything in DeFi, right? It's all fragmented. Like, imagine if in traditional markets, if you had to go to like, 8 different websites for everything you did on, say, Robinhood, right? You had to go like swap.robinhood.com and like fixedincome.robinhood.com and options.robinhood.com and all these different sites. That experience would really suck, right? So we have this really fragmented experience today where you need to go to 10 different applications, and then those 10 different applications are different on another chain, and that experience just kind of sucks. So you have, fragmented liquidity, fragmented experience. I think a lot of what we focus on is working with a lot of these builders, even sitting up here, and integrating a lot of this technology so that, one, it's abstracted from the user, but also, two, it's just quicker, cheaper, and more scalable if we can do, bridging and swapping at the same time, or, building some DeFi strategy in a single transaction instead of 6 or 8 or 10 transactions, or getting leverage instead of looping individually, 15 times, just doing that in one step. And I think that's really where the future is. And that's where we start approaching things that actually can be adopted by the masses.
Yeah, and I think to like build upon that, right? Like again, taking one step back, a lot of DeFi, I mean, was pretty much built on the principle of composability, right? Like you can do one thing here, and then another application can take those smart contracts and then integrate into their own deposit into Vault, do whatever you guys want. And so you sort of have these single transactions that bundle together multiple actions. Well, the same thing across chains, right? And so on the token side for unified liquidity, I think, you know, all the technologies out there, right? Like whether LayerZero or, you know, other generic messaging protocols, you have this ability to now burn mint across chains without any slippage. One-to-one, you can move the entire token supply if you want. You didn't have that a few years ago. And even with like L2 native bridges, right, most of them are just multi-sigs with lockboxes that issue wrapped assets on the other side, which fragment liquidity. And so, you know, we're coming to a stage in crypto now where we actually have all the infra out there that's available, and you can compose across chains, and you can build, you know, really cool applications. It's more so like an education gap between, you know, actual builders now. And so, you know, we're super excited for what people will build in the future. But I think in terms of like unified liquidity, all the tools are pretty much out there, and then you can build abstraction on top and do some really cool stuff.
For me, you know, obviously from a real world asset standpoint, you know, unified liquidity is not easily accomplished. You know, it hinges on regulatory frameworks and whatnot. Having said that, I think, you know, from our panelists, esteemed panelists, it's, you know, DeFi infrastructure is obviously, you know, at a stage where I think we can scale. But I think unlocking true value for users is the next iteration or next obstacle that we have to face and overcome. My view is, you know, that there are a lot of people, like 3/4 of the world, who wants to use the US dollar, for example, like stablecoin, for example. It's a real DeFi Trojan horse, if you think about it, right? 3/4 of the world want to hold US dollars, digital dollars that is the better form and shape than, you know, paper dollar, because it's called stable dollar, you know, stable dollar. And you know, there's $15 trillion of euro dollars, i.e. to say dollars that is circulating outside the US economy. I think using that and applying, you know, powerful user-centric dApps is going to drive a lot of user adoption and use cases. Like imagine having a yield-bearing asset, you know, stable asset, you know, non-custodian MetaMask. It becomes a saving account, you know, checking account overnight, and that's powerful. That's very powerful for a lot of people in Turkey, a lot of people in Argentina, a lot of people in South America, because that 4%, 5% treasury yield is going to pay a lot of things, right? It's going to hit 70% inflation rate, you know, overnight, you know, in some countries of the world. So my point is that it's both regulatory, it's a bit of more regulatory for real world asset and mass adoption. When I say mass adoption, like I'm talking about guys who are brand new to crypto, guys who do not even know what a MetaMask is, and guys who want to use crypto but may not necessarily need to, you know, use a MetaMask. So I think that's when regulatory regulators and central banks around the world allow that and permissible, you know, more clarity in distribution, real world assets, securities, and stable coins. I think that's where we will start seeing a unified liquidity. And that's where we unlock trillions of dollars from the world economy to crypto. And I think that's where the bullish case for crypto becomes.
And the final question, with a unified liquidity and account abstractions, what do you think? Are we ready for mass adoption? Do we ready to introduce it to the traditional world?
I think a lot of the like smart account stuff and all these like ERC, you know, EIP, you know, initiatives sound really good in practice, but are really hard to actually get mass adoption, because it's really hard to move people off of something like MetaMask or something like that. Like you've like what, like 30, 40, 50 million monthly users for MetaMask. Like, you're not going to convince any meaningful percentage of that to start using some smart account somewhere, right? So I think we probably need to see more, you know, integrations with what people actually use today, because it's going to be really hard to like have there's a huge switching cost, right? And the barrier for entry is so much smaller if you could build something that works with the tools people use today.
I guess we are far away from mass adoption, but I still think about the early days of internet. I have seen like these talk shows, and where people just spoke about, oh, what is internet? So who needs it? Yeah, and now you're laughing about that. Yeah, you have internet everywhere. Yeah, in your pocket. So the same will happen with crypto sooner or later. I think we need a little bit time, maybe 5 years. of traditional time, and in our Web3 time, it's like 50 years. So 1 year for 10 years. So we will see. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's yes and no, right? Like, like when we're talking about, do we have the infra today? Like, as this generation gets older and older, right? Like, it already is very difficult to set up a bank account. It's much easier to set up a MetaMask or Phantom. We even see with meme coins, right? Like, a lot of people, our generation, our age, like, that friction is there, but if they want to do it, they'll do it, right? And so, like, although there are still barriers, like we can abstract everything on the chain level, the liquidity level, everything, and make that easier. But at the same point, like, I think you just have to build stuff that people want to use, and then people will go ahead and build even if there's friction there, or use it, right? And so I think on the UX side, we can always get better, and there's a lot of awesome stuff happening in the abstraction layer. But in terms of like purely just building stuff that people want to build, I think there still needs to be a lot more innovation on the consumer side, apps that people actually want to use, and just building some really cool stuff again. I think DeFi Summer was like one of the last times I saw some really cool stuff happen in DeFi, and want to sort of see another renaissance, in the next few years. But yeah, I think you build cool stuff, people will come, no matter how hard the friction is.
Yeah, I think nothing much to add, but I think clearly build they're saying build an income, but I guess the real what we're building for and the pain points. I think building killer dApps and apps will drive liquidity, and even if you're liquidity but there's no demand and there's no real problems being solved, there's no point having the unified liquidity. The unified liquidity is a function of real use cases, real users, and people actually wanting to use the product, and I think that's what drives a unified liquidity experience.
I think this is an amazing time when we right now. So we will have a chance to see how the crypto will transfer, and we are the builders who help to get the crypto introduced to the real market. So thank you for your time, and see new innovations, and everything what will happen, we will follow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.